Do you love drawing cards? Do you love it more than any other aspect of Magic? Then this is the deck tech for you. We've got a Jin Gitaxias deck tech. Let's go. Jin Gitaxias is one of the new Praetors for March of the Machine. It's got Ward 2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, you get to draw a card. Then also you can transform Jin Gitaxias into the Great Synthesis. It's a saga, and for the first chapter you get to draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, and you have no maximum hand size for as long as you control the Great Synthesis. Chapter 2 returns all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hands. And Chapter 3 lets us play any number of spells from our hand without paying their mana cost. So what are the goals with this deck? Our goal is to draw as many cards as possible and play spells for free and then win through alternative win conditions. Let's get into it. To start off this ramp train, we're adding Arcane Signet. Everybody knows what this mana rock does. It's pretty awesome. I typically hate 3 mana rocks, but we're running Commander Sphere because it's going to help us draw a card from Jin Gitaxias, and we can sack it to draw a card. Decanter of Endless Water is another one of those 3 mana rocks, but it also gives us no maximum hand size, which works great with our card draw. Getting back to efficient ramp, we're going to run another 2 mana rock, Liquid Metal Torque. Midnight Clock's an all-star in this deck. It's a 3 mana rock for 1, then also it's going to let you wheel after a certain point. Mind Stone's just some efficient ramp that's going to let us also draw a card if we really need to get some card advantage. Since we're running a ton of instant and sorceries, Mind Splice Apparatus is going to come in handy. It's going to just keep reducing the cost of all of our spells. I'm also running Sky Diamond because it's a 2 mana rock and I'm too lazy to come up with anything else. I want to be a real Commander player, that's why I'm putting Soul Ring in this deck. Every deck needs Soul Ring. I'm going to round out all this ramp with Thought Vessel. It's a 2 mana rock that also gives us no maximum hand size, so it works great with all that card draw. Now that we're done ramping, it's time to start casting spells. Let's get into some of those interaction pieces to stop our opponents from doing their game plan. First up, there's Capsize. It's just going to bounce a permanent to its owner's hand, but it has buyback, so we can keep using it over and over and over. Then we're adding the tried and true Counter Spell. It's just going to counter any spell. This thing has caused more table flipping than any other card. And then for some mass removal, we're going to run Cyclonic Rift. I know this card's a little overplayed, but darn, it's powerful. Then we're running the upgraded counter spell, Mana Drain, just going to give us mana from countering spells. Negate's going to counter any non-creature spell, that way we can protect our commander from removal or stop a game-winning play. Pongify is going to turn their game-winning threat into an adorable 3/3 green ape. Rapid Hybridization is a functional reprint of Pongify, but instead of an ape, they get a 3/3 green frog lizard. Spellskite's going to protect our important creatures by redirecting spells to it, and is also a Phyrexian for some extra added flavor. Sublime Epiphany literally does it all for 6 mana. We get to counter spells, activated abilities, return things to their hands, create tokens, and draw cards. Swan Song is one of the most efficient counter spells. It's going to counter any enchantment, instant, or sorcery for 1 mana, and they get a measly bird. The Phasing of Zhalfir is one of our mass removal pieces. It's going to protect a couple of our things, and then destroy all creatures and give them Phyrexians. Unwind's an overcosted negate, but it lets us untap up to 3 lands. That way we've got answers ready. Now it's time to draw some cards. Archmage Emeritus is going to let us draw a card every time we cast an instant or a sorcery. Archmage's Charm gives us versatility, lets us counter spells, steal permanents of mana value 1 or less, or more importantly, draw 2 cards. We can pump all of our mana in the Blue Sun Zenith to draw 100,000 cards, and then luckily it shuffles back into our library so we can do it again later. Consecrated Sphinx is going to let us keep drawing cards every time an opponent does, and we're probably going to draw our entire deck. Deep Analysis is going to let us draw 2 cards for 4 mana, but luckily we can flash it back for 2, and a little bit of life to draw 2 cards again. Defiler of Dreams is a Phyrexian Sphinx, so it's on flavor, and it's going to let us reduce the cost of our permanent spells, and every time we play a blue permanent spell, we get to draw a card. Dig Through Time is going to let us look at the top 7 cards of our library, pick the 2 best ones, put them in our hand, and put the rest on the bottom, and it does have Delve to reduce its cost. Echo of Eons is a wheel effect, but we can flash it back for a reduced mana cost, and we do have some cards that go well with wheels in this deck. Enter the Infinite lets us draw our entire deck, and that gives us access to our alternative win conditions. Flow of Knowledge is going to let us draw a card for each island we control, and we're going to have a ton in play, because we're running mono blue. Frantic Search is going to help us filter through our deck. It lets us draw 2 cards, then we get to discard 2, but it lets us untap 3 lands. Of course, we're playing the original Jin Gitaxias, the Core Augur. It's going to let us draw 7 cards at our end step, and it reduces our opponent's hands by 7. Mystic Confluence is quite flexible. It's going to let us counter spells, bounce creatures, and draw cards. Mystic Remora is going to be one of the best enchantments in the deck. It's going to let us draw cards every time an opponent casts a non-creature spell because they can't pay the 4. Mystical Tutor is going to let us get the instant or sorcerer we need out of our deck and right on top of the library. Nezahal, the Primal Tie, is a huge beatdown threat and also lets us draw cards every time an opponent plays a non-creature spell. Pull from Tomorrow is a massive X spell to draw us a ton of cards, and even better, it's instant speed to surprise our opponents. Let me ask, do you pay the 1 because Ristic Study is going to draw us a ton of cards in the game? Seagate Restoration is awesome because it's a land if we need a land, but it also lets us draw cards equal to the number of cards in our hand, and we have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Serum Sovereign's another Phyrexian Sphinx. What it's going to do is every time we cast a non-creature spell, we get an oil counter, and we get to remove oil counters to scry and draw cards. Stroke of Genius is another massive X spell that draws us a ton of cards. Teferi's Ageless Insight is an enchantment that's going to help draw us extra cards because every time we draw a card, we draw 2 instead. Treasure Cruise lets us draw 3 cards and it has Delve, so it's basically Ancestral Recall. Windfall's just another wheel effect. It's going to make everybody discard their hands and draw cards equal to the player that had the most cards. Now, we wouldn't be a degenerate Phyrexian player if we didn't run these cards. Extra turn spells. They're awesome, and your opponents will hate you. First, there's Expropriate. It's going to either let you take extra turns or steal permanents from your opponents. Either way, you win. We're running Teferi. He has some cool abilities, but we like his ultimate. Lets us take 2 extra turns, basically time stretch. However, we are running the actual time stretch. Just lets us take 2 extra turns for 10 mana. Finally, we're running the Tried and True Time Warp. Just lets us take an extra turn for 5 mana. Now that we're drawing cards, taking extra turns, and removing threats, let's get into how we win, the payoffs. First, there's Alondra Sky Dreamer. When we draw those extra cards, first we're going to make Drakes. We draw enough, they're going to pump the Drakes and get in for lethal. Chrome Host Seed Shark is our Phyrexian Shark, and when we cast a non-creature spell, we get to incubate X and make those incubator tokens. Then we're running the Kamigawa Jin Gitaxias, the Progress Tyrant. It's going to duplicate our artifacts, instant and sorcery spells, and counter our opponents. We're going to be drawing a ton of cards in this deck, and we're probably going to deck ourselves, so we're going to run Laboratory Maniac, so we'll win if we run out of cards. Mercurial Spell Dancer is another Phyrexian friend. It's going to let us copy our instant and sorcery spells. Min Wily Illusionist is going to let us create some illusions from our draw spells, and also let us cheat permanents into play. I told you there was a reason we're running wheel effects. That's because we're playing Narset. We don't want our opponents drawing cards. We are also playing Omniscience, kind of like the Great Synthesis. It's just going to let us cheat every spell we have into play without paying its mana cost. Psychosis Crawler is another Phyrexian friend. Whenever we draw a card, each opponent loses a life, and we'll be drawing a lot of cards. Shark Typhoon is going to give us a little shark buddy every time we cast a non-creature spell. Towering Sky Summoner is also going to add to our Drake army like Alondra. Every time we cast an instant or sorcery, we get a Drake. We've got to play the Bane of the Commander format, Thassa's Oracle. This card just says we win when we have very few cards in our library. Triskaidekaphile lets us win the game if we have exactly 13 cards in our hand. Should be easy for us. Alright, we're almost done with this deck tech. Now we're going to get to the more boring part for a lot of folks, the lands. Let's get it. Castle Vantress taps for a blue and also gives us some great card selection with its scry ability. Then we're also running 29 of these beautiful Phyrexian islands to add to our Phyrexian theme. If we are starting to flood out, Lonely Sandbar can be cycled for a blue to draw us a card. Mystic Sanctuary is the most busted island ever printed. It's going to let us get an instant or sorcery back from our graveyard to the top of our library. Otawara, the Soaring City, can be tapped for a blue, and we can also channel it to bounce an artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. Reliquary Tower taps for a colorless, and it also gives us no maximum hand size, so we get to keep all those cards we draw. Remote Isles, just another one of those cycling lands in case we're flooding out, just to keep getting cards in our hand. War Room taps for a colorless, and is also another way for us to draw yet again more cards. I hope you build this deck, that way you can terrorize your local LGS or your playgroup. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thanks.